one of the reasons that there are bank bailouts is to ensure that the payment system continues to function. Because without a payment system, the economy would grind to a halt, and there'd be severe economic losses.
What is the probability of a banking crisis taking place in South Africa anytime soon? Joining me to unpack is freelance financial journalist and Daily Friend contributor and columnist Jonathan Katzenellenbogen. Jonathan, thanks very much for being with us today. Just to start off with, I'm going to link to your latest article on the Daily Friend that we're going to discuss in the description below. Just to start off with, we've had now some talk around banking crunches, not a crisis as yet, but Silicon Valley Bank, Credit Suisse as the two biggest examples globally. Can you just tell us a little bit about what a banking crisis is? It's not the case of people just standing outside a building trying to get their deposits out, maybe as it was in the 1920s, for example.
Now they would do it online or on the phone, and I should imagine big corporate lenders, big corporate depositors would call up the bank. What it inevitably involves a banking crisis is a banking run and a run on deposits. And that involves people wanting to get their deposits out of the bank ASAP. It's panic. And it was experienced, it was the last time in 2008 after the Lehman Brothers internationally. And it's a mass run on the bank, a mass run on the deposits. So all the depositors want out, and all the lenders want, and the lenders, those who are not on fixed-term loans, don't want to lend to the bank. And these things are often precipitated. The immediate proximate cause is that lenders don't want to extend loans. Now, in my article that appeared earlier this week, I discussed what sort of crisis might South Africa have. I just want to preface my remarks that we're admired all over the world for good regulation. It's something that the Reserve Bank and the other financial regulators do well, and they keep an eye on the banks. We certainly had a string of banking crises. Most recently, African Bank went under, and VBS Bank went under. Two smaller banks, but we haven't had a major bank in distress since I think Nedbank had received an injection from Old Mutual way back in I think it was in the 80s. So. Now, there's another type of banking crisis that is not covered by those two that I discussed, Credit Suisse and SVB, and that is what I call the Iceland type, Portugal, Ireland, Greece, and Spain type crisis. These are a banking crisis that is combined with the debt crisis. Now, post-Lehman Brothers in 2008, these countries were highly vulnerable because they had become highly indebted and their banks had borrowed extensively. They had invested abroad, and it was all on borrowed money. And post-Lehman Brothers, the world panicked and went into recession. And the banks in these so-called PIGS countries, Portugal, Ireland, Greece, and Spain, and Iceland went first. The loan defaults shot up because of the recession, and then the over indebtedness of the banks themselves put stress on the system, and most of these countries experienced a number of bank failures. So I think these are the sorts of crises that South Africa might face, because the country is experiencing a lack of confidence. Every single indicator says that. And while the banks don't seem to be, I haven't looked at their balance sheets, but they're not they're not under strain. The Reserve Bank really looks after things, and we can have a great deal of confidence in that. But nevertheless, what the problem is, and this highlights the problem of the risk of bonds, they're sitting on about, between them, 25% of their total assets are in government bonds. Now, what happens if most of the bonds are locally held, but there's a fair portion held by overseas investors, and those overseas investors, when there's what they call risk on due to rising interest rates in the US or signs of bank failure in the US or elsewhere, the first assets that they want to drop are those in emerging markets. And this is what happens to our bonds. They drop them. And when COVID broke out, you recall, soon after the world went into lockdown and we went into lockdown, they got rid of a massive amount of bonds and of South African bonds, and these were taken up by the Reserve Bank. That's its job, to maintain the liquidity of markets, and particularly bond markets. And they came in and saved the day back in March 2019. So, but what if this happens on a massive scale? And what if with bonds held by South Africa, bonds held by banks rise? Then, the bank's balance sheet would certainly be under the proportion of bonds that they held and the absolute amount rises. Prices decline, but they are holding on a lot of bonds. Then their balance sheets would be under stress. 25% is certainly a risk. They've got a lot in there, and they have to have those for capital requirements. So, but not to the extent that they probably do, and they trade in these all the time. So that's part of the problem. Another problem that has arisen recently, of course, is this international task force grey listing South Africa, because we're weak on terrorist financing and money laundering. And, we were given warnings some time ago, and we remain weak on these in these areas. So, a lot of people, this adds South African risk, it heightens South African risk. And, if we were to need a bailout, many banks, if they're an emergency and banks are under stress, but the big banks might say, well, we're a bit worried about this. It's a big worry point, this grey listing, and it creates additional concerns and risk. Added to this, what happens if there's load shedding? The banks have to come under stress. Many of their clients, clearly many clients have resorted to their own power generator, invested in their own power generation. But there are many who have not and rely on the grid still. And those would be certainly the mines, large mineral processing companies, and so forth. And the banks and big financial institutions have all met and asked themselves, what are our contingency plans to deal with this? One of the problems is that one of the expectations, it's a low probability event, but certainly one with a high impact. It's called the black swan nowadays. But if indeed this came to pass and there was national unrest and payments didn't clear, that would create major problems, because one of the reasons that there are bank bailouts is to ensure that the payment system continues to function, because without a payment system, the economy would grind to a halt, and there'd be severe economic losses. So I think, with all our problems of governance, the risks to the banks are certainly increasing. and that scenario of a sovereign debt crisis, bank failure crisis is increasing.
Thank you very much for watching. Before you leave, a reminder, please, to like this video if you have not yet done so. We also invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, this has been Chris Hattingh, Head of Policy Analysis at the Center for Risk Analysis. Take care.